Hello, BookTube and all Repairman Jack fans. My name is Nathan. Thank you so much for watching. So this is my long discussion video for Crisscross, which is book number 8 in the Repairman Jack series. It was first published in 2004. The book before this is Gateways, in which Jack goes down to Florida to take care of his father, who's involved in this hit and run. The stuff that happens in Gateways, at least a little bit of it, definitely shows up in Crisscross. And then book number 9 is the one that follows, which is Infernal, where Jack spends significant time with his brother. And so you start seeing more and more of his family members at this point. So by the time we get to Infernal, then you've really gotten to all of his close family members because you already had his sister Kate, and then his father with Gateways, and then in Infernal with his brother. And so that's really it. All right, Crisscross. Oh man, this book is so good. If you have not, if this is your first time reading it, then I'm sure you enjoyed it. And if this is your second time reading it, then I think you look at it, at least for me, this is just my reaction to it. I look at Crisscross and I'm like, wow, is this book so great? And in part, it's because Jack and okay, Jack ultimately is up against really tough odds in this book. Now, it does come up in one of the other ones where he's up against really big odds. I'm trying to think of which one it is. I want to say it's All the Rage. All the Rage. Sorry, I had to look at the shelf to remind myself. Where, and this is a spoiler for All the Rage. At the end of it, then he goes up against Scarlip, which is one of the Rakoshi monsters, and he loses. And it's actually pretty satisfying to see Jack go up against this thing that is just so much more powerful than him. And in this, Jack is going up against the Dormentalist Church, which is so much bigger than him. And it's also satisfying in that way. So I am going to jump right into spoilers with this. If you have not read the book and you don't want there to be spoilers, then don't watch this video. You can go back and watch the spoiler-free one. But ultimately, what ends up happening in this book is Jack gets two cases at once. So he is approached by this woman, Mrs. Roselli, who says that her son, she says that, she's incredibly wealthy. Her son has gotten involved in the Dormentalist Church, and she wants Jack to find him. She offers him $25,000 just to find him and say, hey, you got to call your mom. What you realize as you read the book, and by the time you get to the end, and it's really in the last 50 pages or so that Jack ends up being in close touch with her again. She is a lady with a dog. She is a lady with a Rottweiler. You find out, she says later on that Jack can call her Herta. Because at first, and she says her name is Maria Roselli, but then she says, no, my name is actually Herta. This goes back to what happens in Gateways, where you've got Anya Mundy, and I apologize because I think I called her Muncie in the Gateways video, but it's Anya Mundy, and her dog Irving, or Irv, but with her accent, right, then it's Oiv. And so in Gateways, then you find out that Anya is one of the ladies with a dog. In this, you realize that there are several of them, right? We've met at least 4. We've met 4 at this point in the series, and there are potentially who knows how many others. And then at the end of this, then Anya is killed because she cannot be killed by anything of this world. But of course, you've got Semele, who brings up the Chew Wasps from the Senate, from the Otherness, who then go and attack her. So because they're not from this world, then they can actually attack and kill Anya. So then one of the ladies dies. But then in this one, then you find out that Herta, or Maria Roselli, she's also one of the ladies. So she is a mother. She's the mother to everyone on Earth. She's Jack's mother and everyone else in the series. It's all a ruse. She, sort of, everyone is her child. She's a mother to everyone. So she wasn't really lying and saying, I want you to find my son. But it's not, she's not his biological mother. Ultimately, it was a ruse to get Jack involved in the Dormentalist Church, because what you realize as you continue reading is that this cult is ultimately doing things that will bring about Night World, will bring about the otherness on Earth, that will allow the adversary, or Rosalam, to, ultimately what it's going to do is, by implanting these different pillars at different points on Earth with this volunteer, or really just any human sacrifice inside one of the pillars. It has to be from stone or sand from one of these nexus points between our world and the otherness, that each time one of those things gets implanted, then the ladies get another mark on their back. They get another wound where it looks like a cigarette burn. That ultimately, by the time all of these are implanted, that will effectively kill off all of the ladies who are essentially defending Earth. They're one of the defenders who, where at least they oppose the adversary, but they're not on the side of the ally either, right? That they're a third force involved in all of this. Well, that's why she wants Jack involved, because she's saying, look, they're going to be able to finish this program of planting all of these different pillars or columns at these key places on Earth. They're going to be able to finish this within a year, and so I want you involved, and I want you to see the globe that Luther Brady, who's in charge of the Dormentalist Church, I want you to see that. And she was just hoping that if she could get Jack at all into this Dormentalist Church on any kind of case, he would ultimately realize there is something sinister going on here, and it's absolutely connected to the otherness, which is, of course, what ends up happening. So the other thing, too, that I should mention, and if it's been a while since you've read Gateways, then those, the actual pillars, they're coming from William Blagden and Sons. If you remember in this, and there was that construction company that was hauling sand from the Cenote. Again, it's Cenote. I'm not sure. I think that's how you pronounce it. In any case, from this pit in the Everglades that they're hauling the sand, because Luther Brady, I guess, has realized that that's one of the nexus points, so that sand will work, and that's how he's then turning these pillars into, like, he's turning it, the sand into cement, concrete pillars. So that's a big plot that you've got. Luther Brady, in charge of the church, he, is talking about Hokano, which is you have to reunite your spirit with your Zelton counterpart who's like on the Hokano world, and Hokano is Japanese for other, or the otherness in general, right? And so that's how Jack gets tipped off to all of this. Okay, so you have that, but then you've got another subplot also, really, and it is a bit of a subplot because the Dormentalist Church is really the primary plot in this book, but that's where Jack is approached by a nun. Her name is Sister Margaret Mary. She's being blackmailed because essentially she had an affair with a man who's helping out the church. She's working at a very poor church in New York City, and she's trying to take care of these children, trying to raise money for them. This wealthy guy starts helping, and then they have an affair. Well, Richie Cordova, who is a private investigator, and we previously saw him blackmailing people, well, he ends up taking pictures of this, and he's blackmailing the nun, so that's how come she approaches Jack. Well, like I say, this does touch on, and I can't remember which book it is that Cordova's in. I'm drawing a blank. But in any case, like, we met Richie Cordova previous to this, where Jack goes in and he destroys all of his photographs to try to get him to stop harassing one of his clients. And so you see him again in this, and then you're going to say, like, but how does this all crisscross? And ultimately, Jack uses Richie Cordova at the end of the book to essentially, he makes it seem as though Luther Brady has murdered Richie Cordova because Richie Cordova was taking compromising pictures of Luther Brady. And so this basically works. Luther Brady goes to jail. Richie Cordova is dead because he ends up killing Sister Margaret Mary. And this is really like the first big thing that I wanted to talk about. This idea of the reciprocity of Jack. Jack has got this philosophy of how he does things. So he initially does not take out Cordova, and this is his explanation for it. This is on page 370 of my edition. And this is after he's already killed. I believe it's after he's already killed Margaret Mary. It says, a slimeball like Cordova didn't deserve to live, shouldn't have bothered finessing the fix. oxygen waster like him, best thing to do for his victims and for the human gene pool was to walk up to him and deliver a hollow point between the eyes. But Jack hadn't wanted to set himself on that road, feared once he started traveling it he might not be able to step off. He'd approached Cordova as a guy who wasn't doing anyone physical harm. His bloodletting was emotional and financial, so Jack had taken a parallel approach. Cordova was hands-off, so Jack had gone the hands-off route. He realized now that was a mistake. A bullet to the brain would have solved the Cordova problem. Quick, clean, easy. No more blackmail, and sure as hell no worry about a good-hearted nun being abducted. So, this is, like I say, that's basically Jack's philosophy. And this is the great thing about Jack, is that he very much is bringing about, I guess it would be dramatic irony, or sorry, not dramatic irony, I apologize. It'd be poetic justice, right? That's really what Jack is doing. It's that his type of justice is poetic. It is so fitting. Whatever the person did, Jack tries to turn it around on them and get them to be undone by their own methods. So whatever methods they're employing to exploit people, that's what Jack wants to do in return. So the way he approached Cordova is he's like, well, he's not physically hurting people. He's not being violent. Instead, what he's doing is he's hurting them financially. He's hurting them emotionally. So that's how Jack initially goes about trying to hurt Cordova, where he effectively ruins his blackmail business. And by doing so, he ends up hurting him financially. And so he's thinking, this is how my operation should work. But the problem with Cordova is that he doesn't just remain in that domain of just trying to hurt people emotionally and financially. All right, so that's one thing that I thought was really interesting with this book. The other thing, and this is a fairly big thing for the book is very much about organized religion. And so it is different than what you get in the Haunted Air. So the Haunted Air, I argued in my video, the Haunted Air is very much about faith. It's about faith on an individual level. You get into Gia's faith, you get into, both of the brothers, and, I apologize, I'm blanking on their names right now. But you've got the brothers who own their psychic parlor, essentially. And with that, then you've got the one who is a born-again Christian. So, it is Lyle and Charlie. And so Charlie, he is a born-again Christian, and his brother Lyle is not. And they don't see eye to eye on this. But you're also dealing with the afterlife, with the girl who's been killed in that house, who ends up coming back. That through that, you get all these different characters who really are reflecting on their own spiritual belief system. But in this is not so much about that on an individual level. It's very much about religion and organized religion. And F. Paul Wilson is doing two different things here, and it's very interesting because, or really like three different things. On the one hand, he's talking about the Dormentalist Church, and he establishes that it is a cult, that it is obviously corrupt, that anybody who's involved should see it for what it is. It's really just a way to exploit people's vulnerabilities, their desperate need to improve, to see self-improvement in their own lives, to somehow be more successful, and to feel like they have got the answers. So he's looking at this and saying, it's sad when people get involved in this kind of organized religion where they call themselves a church, but really it's a cult, and they don't recognize it for what it is. And people will basically do anything to continue believing something, even when it's apparent that it's a lie. So that is kind of the first point that he's making about this. But then at the same time, you've also got Sister Margaret Mary, who is a nun. Her faith is very important to her. She's working for the Catholic Church, a particular church in, I can't remember. In any case, in New York City. And she's doing good work. And he's not, while in the series, Wilson is establishing that the Catholic Church is really, it's got some things kind of correct, where it's a pale reflection of this cosmic war that's going on, but ultimately, like, it doesn't really have the answers, right? That there's the whole secret history of the world, and the Catholic Church is not really privy to this. That if there are elements of truth to the religion, then it's only because they've tapped into some of the secret history of the world, but they've created a whole other narrative that doesn't actually make sense, or that's not actually real or true. So he's saying, look, not all organized religion is necessarily bad and exploiting people, because the Catholic Church, for all of its faults, as you see in this, somebody like Margaret Mary, who has devoted her life to the church, she is genuinely a good person who genuinely cares about her community and is genuinely doing good things and relying on people giving money to the church to take care of children in a poor neighborhood. So he's not just throwing all organized religions, under the bus. He's not attacking all of them, but he is attacking some. And then at the same time, then you get Jack, who is very much agnostic. I think that would be the best way of describing him. It's not that he is an atheist. It's not that he even really opposes people having whatever beliefs they want to have about spirituality and the afterlife and all of that. It's just he doesn't bother himself with those questions. So he seems fairly disinterested in issues of faith and spirituality. However, this is the great irony of the series. He has spent his entire adult life trying to create a life in which he is not being manipulated by society. He's not being manipulated by the law. He's not being manipulated in any way. He is as independent as you can possibly be. He has tried to be an island, essentially, right? On an individual level, he is an island. No one is pushing him around and telling him what he can do and what he can't do. He is very libertarian in that way. But the great irony of the series is that there are cosmic forces that are so much bigger than the federal government that are now manipulating Jack's life, that he is starting to feel more and more like a pawn just being moved around on a chessboard, as though he has really no say in this. And that is very difficult for him to accept. And even with all of the crazy things that he sees, it still takes a lot for Jack to ultimately start accepting the secret history of the world. And so this is the third part that I wanted to mention when it comes to this idea of organized religion. Well, this is not so much about organized religion, not necessarily, but what you see with this is that on page 472 to 473, then Jack is talking to Herda. Herda, again, is a lady with a dog, and they're talking about his role. She gives a good long history on this. Long for the series in that it's like 10 or 12 pages. You desperately want more, but it's still more than just a paragraph or two. So what she does is she explains Jack's role in all of this, and then she shows him that on her back, she has the same wounds as Anya. And you find out that those wounds are associated with the Dormentalist Church implanting these pillars at important points around Earth. That this is Operation Omega, right? What you get with this is that this has been going on for a long time, right? Well before the Dormentalist Church was around. Then Operation Omega, or Opus Omega, I think is what it's called, then that's been going on for a long time. But each time a pillar gets implanted, she gets a wound, and once all of them are implanted, she will die. So he's looking at this, and then she's trying to show him the actual wounds that she's experienced. So she then says, Herda back toward him, "Go ahead, touch it, it's healed now." Jack felt the touch of queasiness. "No, I don't think. Place your fingers in the wound, it will not bite you," because she shows him a deep depression in the small of her back, big enough for, say, 2 of Jack's fingers. He reached toward it, then snatched his hand back. Sorry, I should have read that part. Then it says, Jack reached out again and slid his forefinger to the first joint into the depression. It was deep. He could feel nothing against his fingertip. He eased his finger farther into the second knuckle, and still nothing against his fingertips. Jack couldn't bring himself to push farther. He withdrew and leaned closer to see if he could get an idea of how deep it was. Maybe then he jerked his head back. Jesus Christ. He had nothing to do with this either. Sorry, that's Herta who says it. He had nothing to do with this either. Had he seen what he thought he'd seen? No, not possible. But then not possible had lost all meaning some time ago. Jack peered again into the opening. He saw a scar-lined tunnel, and at its far end, light, daylight, a circle of blue sky and distant buildings. Christ, he was looking at the Queen's waterfront on the East River, viewing it through a hole that ran clear through Herta's body. Okay, so she's got this horrible wound. You find out that that is from when Anya died. That if one of the ladies dies, it has a profound physical impact on all the other ladies who exist on Earth. So Jack sees this wound, and he doesn't believe what he's seeing, but he is drawn to put his fingers towards it. Now, in Gateways, I brought up in that video that Anya's back, like that you get a lot of Christian imagery in this book. And one of those would be the wounds on Anya's back, the flaying of her skin, because essentially, like, I know it's not flayed in this, in this case it's like burned, although there maybe is some flaying with the crisscrossing of the lines. But ultimately, that is very much, it fits into Christian imagery of Christ being flayed before being crucified. So that's the first part. So you should make note of that. And then in this, because it's a representation of the wounds that she is bearing, she's bearing the wounds really in defense of humanity. And then in this, then she's got this giant wound where it goes right through her. Well, you then should think about the idea of Christ who, through the crucifixion, has the nails that go through his hands and feet. And then beyond that, this is his proof when he is resurrected. This is his proof to his disciples. This is his proof to the apostles that it is actually him. And of course, there is Thomas, the apostle Thomas, or doubting Thomas, who refused to believe that it could actually be Jesus unless he actually stuck his finger through the wound. Right? And that's what Jack is literally doing here. I mean, Jack does that. And as soon as he does that, he pushes his hand in, realizes that it will just keep going and going, that it is a hole through her. He pulls his head back, his head, although I'm sure at that point he's pulled his hand back as well. And he says, Jesus Christ. And then she's like, no, he's not part of this. And then, he brings it up again. He says, Christ. He was looking at the Queen's waterfront on the East River. And if you have not watched the video on Gateways, like very briefly, my point with that is that the idea in the series, within the series itself, it's that Christian stories are a reflection of the secret history of the world, right? That you can look at this and you can say, oh, Wilson is doing a version of Christian imagery here. But within the series, then what it is that Christianity is doing a version of the secret history of the world, if you follow what I'm saying with that. So I just thought that was an interesting thing that you get that again. There were just a couple other things that I wanted to mention. For one thing, you get the Compendium of Srem, right? The Compendium of Srem, it's S-R-E-M. It is such an interesting thing. It is basically this ancient text that, and I love the description it's got. It basically tells Luther Brady specifically how to implant these pillars to bring about Operation Opus Omega, how to complete this, and gives him all the instructions for it. Whatever your first language is, that's the language that you see in this book, and that it is impossible to destroy. And so this is, I believe that this is, oh, who was it who was explaining it to him? I believe that it is, that it's Herta who's explaining this. Yeah, where she says, and this is page 461 of my edition, The Grand Inquisitor himself, Torquemada, this is from the 15th century, the Catholic Church trying to destroy the book, the Compendium of Srem, is said to have been so repulsed after reading only a part of the compendium that he ordered a huge bonfire built and hurled the book into the flames, but it would not burn, nor would it be cut by the sharpest sword or the heaviest axe. So he dropped it into the deepest well in the Spanish Empire. He filled that well with granite boulders, even built the monastery of St. Thomas over it. Oh, and I just noticed that. That's an interesting connection as well. Thomas, right? Saint Thomas there. And as I pointed out, that Jack, being a doubting Thomas, that Jack doesn't believe these things. He genuinely needs so much evidence to believe the secret history of the world. And so in any case, that's a nice little point there, St. Thomas, that you get. And then Jack gave a low whistle. What the hell was in it? Many things, lists and descriptions of unspeakable rites and ceremonies, diagrams of ancient clockwork machines, but the heart of the compendium is the outline of the Opus Omega, the final process that will assure the ascent of what it calls the other world. And so it's a really great thing. It's obviously the Necronomicon. I always have trouble with that, but the Lovecraft book, right? That this idea, and this is like, it's not the only place that it shows up. It's not just in Lovecraft, but it's very Lovecraftian. And of course, Wilson is a big fan of Lovecraft and cosmic horror in general. So this book in the series, the Compendium, is so much fun to have. I just thought I would point that out, that's a great little element to the book. Okay. I think there was two other things that I want to bring up. So one thing here, your main villain in this book, Luther Brady, who's in charge of the Dormentalist Church, you get another instance of pedophilia in this book. And I think this is at least the third time that we've seen a villainous character who's involved in that, whether you're talking about, child pornography or actual sexual, like physical sexual abuse, not just photographs of sexual abuse of children, right? And I know that this comes up earlier in the series. The first time it comes up, then I think Jack has got the term something along the lines of sexual abuse of a child or sexual exploitation of a child. That's the term that he prefers, because that's ultimately what this is. Now, I don't quite know what to make of it. The fact that it comes up multiple times in the series, I don't think that it's necessarily, I think that some critics would look at this and they would just say that it's low-hanging fruit. If you want to establish that somebody is an evil character, well, turn them into some kind of sexual abuser of children, because that clearly establishes them as being just completely villainous and evil, right? And that readers will immediately just, like, any sympathy they had is going to disappear the second that you do that. But I don't think that it's that simple. I don't think that's the reason for it. I think because of what's going on with this cosmic war, that it's really, abuse of children is certainly one of the most evil things that a human being can do. And in Jack's line of work, he is dealing with people who are involved in all kinds of, to use Christian language, sinful behavior, whether it's, greed or wrath, right? You've got people who are exploiting others for money. What they do, they're trying to earn money, or they're doing violent things. But the actual abuse of the innocent, that is, I think for Jack and for most people, then they view that as being a whole other level of evil. But again, I don't think that Wilson is doing it just because it's an obvious trope to use. I think he's doing it because he's trying to say that those who have a fairly comfortable relationship with the otherness, that the otherness, in fact, enjoys that type of thing, that Razalam enjoys that type of thing. The exploitation of the most vulnerable people in society, the most innocent people, which would be children. So I just wanted to note that is something that comes up several different times at this point in the series, and I think that is supposed to be not just a reflection of the fact that, they're villainous characters, but that they have knowingly or unknowingly allied themselves with something that enjoys some of the most despicable evil behavior imaginable. So there's that to mention. And then briefly, you get some new characters in this book, which is fun, where you've got Russell Tweet. His last name is spelled Tuit. He is Jack's hacker friend, so you get to see him do this to try to take out Richie Cordova's stash of all of the photographs and all of his files against these people that he's been blackmailing. And as best I remember, then we're going to see Russ Tweet come up again and again. And one of the really fun things about this, where this is just a little point for me, Russell Tweet, he got arrested. He's not allowed to go online as a result of it. And so he is going back to school, and he's an English major. So, I mean, I've done this multiple times. I have 3 degrees in English literature. And so I knew what he was referencing here. He's complaining about what he has to read for school. And he's talking about this, that he has to read this awful thing. He says, he shook his head, taking a lit course, right, a literature course. Now I know why I dropped out. Prof's got us wasting our time reading Marcel Marceau. And then Jack blinked. Marcel Marceau was a mime, a man of few words, you might say. Well, then Marcel's somebody. Long-winded guy, zillions of words about nothing, the most boring shit you've ever read. He shook his head again. My life sucks. Okay, if you did not catch this, he's talking about Marcel Proust. Okay, in graduate school, I had to read some Proust. Now, believe me, there are plenty of academics and there are plenty of readers who absolutely love Marcel Proust, who did write approximately zillions of words. It's not really zillions. I think it's somewhere around 3 million words in his series In Search of Lost Time. Or at least it begins with In Search of Lost Time. I forget exactly what it is, but it's volume upon volume. And, it stacks out like this, which I'm sure that the Repairman Jack series is at least that length, because each book is somewhere around, I imagine, I haven't done an actual word count, but I imagine somewhere between 80,000 and 90,000, maybe even 100,000 words. And when you're talking about, like 26 of them, then he's probably in the same ballpark as what you would get with Marcel Proust. But you either love Proust or you really don't. And I can tell you, somebody who's read his stuff for graduate school, in part because you're in graduate school and you're bogged down in so much reading and so much writing that you have to do, that you can kind of resent writers when you feel like they are not getting to the point. And I'm not going to trash Proust, because I haven't, for one thing, I've not studied him well enough to be able to make an insightful comment on him, right? I've only read one of his books, one in the series. And we spent a couple weeks in class talking about him. But I don't feel like that's enough. Like, if you read one Repairman Jack book, I don't think that'd be enough to comment on the entire series. But I can entirely understand why a lot of people would read Marcel Proust and say that it is the most boring shit in the world. I'm not saying that everyone will feel that way, but it is entirely understandable why some people would feel that way. So if you have not read Proust, you can go ahead and try it, see how far you get, and who knows, maybe you will absolutely fall in love. I imagine, though, that if you're a big fan of the Repairman Jack series, you might typically have a taste for literature that has a bit more action than what you get in Proust books. I'll say that. So anyway, you get Russ Tweet, who's a fun character. You also have Preston Loeb, who is, he's gay, he's an interior designer, and he dresses Jack up to look like he's gay, so that way he can throw off Richie Cordova. And so part of this is that you find out, though, that he also has got, like Jack and him, they met through this martial arts course, and apparently Preston was involved with one of Jack's early fix-its when he got to the city. I don't remember if he comes up in any other book. So if you can comment on that, if you do remember Preston Loeb, does he show up in, I'm thinking specifically in Jack the crime thrillers, the early years, not the young adult, but the early years books. I wonder if he comes up in that, because that was an interesting point. So you get those characters, and in general, man, oh man, is this book good. It is so good with the Dormentalist Church. I mean, the stuff that Jack does in this book is amazing. Like the way he takes out Jensen, who is the Grand Paladin in the Dormentalist Church, with that elevator trick. Just in case you forgot what happened, basically what what Jack does is he dings, and this is of course after they've already killed Jamie Grant, who is a reporter for the Light. Sorry, I should have brought that up. You've got Jamie Grant, who's a reporter for the Light, who gets stuck in one of these columns because they pour the concrete over her and kill her because she's trying to expose the Dormentalist Church, and Jensen is head of security. Well, what Jack does is he gets up to Luther Brady's office on the 22nd floor, and then you've got the security guard, the Grand Paladin, Jensen, who comes up to the 21st floor, and he's looking for Jack because Jack initially went to the 21st floor, does his hack of the building that Milk Dud taught him. And so, he opens up the doors, he climbs up the ladder, goes to the 22nd floor, swaps out the actual barrel of the pistol, right, to be able to properly frame Luther Brady for the murder of Richie Cordova. And then he comes back down, he realizes that Jensen is on the 21st floor. So then what he does is he dings the bell on the outside, and Wilson very cleverly mentioned that beforehand, that Jack realized as he goes in, because he kind of brushes against the bell, which says, like bing, that the elevator is there. So he notices that like a couple chapters earlier, and then he wants to take out Jensen. So then, and he does it in such a way that like you can't even prove that he was involved. He just dings the bell when Jensen like pushes the button for the elevator, and he waits till it starts rising up. So then Jensen just, hears the bell ring, the door is open, and he just kind of like walks out and walks onto nothing, kind of is hanging on. And Jack is just enraged at the fact that, Jensen and Luther Brady have killed Jamie Grant, the reporter, who he was working with, and that they cut off one of her fingers, that Jack realized that because she had already lost one of her fingers to an abusive husband. And so then Jack, he's just starting in on like that he's going to cut off Jensen's fingers, and he's like, I don't have time for this, right? I'd love to do it if I could, but I don't. So he just kicks him in the face, and then he just falls down the elevator shaft, and then he still doesn't quite die. So then Jack climbs down the ladder and then literally does like a Bruce Lee and jumps on his vertebrae to then like really like ensure, that he's actually killed him. It is brutally violent, and then Jack of course like calls the elevator back up, and then he's got Jensen's face like poking through the top of the elevator car. And if you think that I'm weird because I'm laughing about this incredibly brutal and violent thing, I mean, I would just say, for one thing, why are you watching my videos then on Repairman Jack if you don't like this stuff? For one thing. For another thing, hey, they're fictional characters. They're not real people, which I think gives a little bit of distance there. And for another thing, Jensen's a really bad dude and he kills people. And so the fact that he gets his in the end, that the world is literally a safer place with him being dead, and that the police probably would never figure out that he was involved in all of these murders. And so Jack literally has done a public service, and there's nothing else you could do. Like, I don't see any other solution that would actually fix things. So there's a little bit of like satisfying justice that you get, like this vicarious justice by reading these books in vigilante fiction, which is one of the things I love about Repairman Jack. It's vigilante fiction where you say, the justice system has serious flaws. There are big problems with the justice system. And wouldn't it be great if you just had a vigilante character who went in there and just took out the bad guys and said to all of the complexity of the criminal justice system, forget that, because it doesn't work very well, and there's all these technicalities in which bad guys can get away with evil acts. And in this, then it's just, there's such simple, satisfying solutions to really big complex problems, and that can be really fun to read. And so that's why I kind of enjoy that stuff. But yeah, you absolutely get Jack at his most brutal in this, and same thing with the way he takes out Richie Cordova, who is, he kills a nun. He literally and he doesn't just kill her, he tortures her before he kills her. And so with that, I mean, it's interesting because Jack fails in a couple ways in this book, and he's also the most violent in this book as a result of that. So I was mentioning All the Rage, where he goes up against Scarlip, the Rakoshi monster, and he loses. And I felt like that was fairly satisfying because you're like, yeah, Jack is up against really big things, and he's not just going to win every single time, and he is going to suffer defeats. And then in this, what I like is that um, he is. It's obviously an awful thing that Margaret Mary dies, the nun, that Jamie Grant dies, but Jack really goes after the people responsible for it, and in a pretty satisfying way. And I think that's one of the things that I really, really enjoy about this book. And also just the whole complexities of the Dormentalist Church and learning all about it. It's really fun. There's so much there. Out of all of the books in the series, I honestly feel like this is the one that I wish I had written. Up until this point, I'm now 8 books in, of the original series, which is 16, like to get to Night World, but then you get the young adult and the early years. But this is basically, I'm now halfway through the original Repairman Jack books, and I look at this and I'm just like, wow, this book is great. He does such a good job of establishing everything about the Dormentalist Church. It is so compelling. You want to learn a little bit more, and he just teases you. He gives you, one little detail after another. You get all this background information, and Jack loses in multiple ways, but he, avenges the death of these people that he was trying to help in a satisfying way. And his solution at the end of this, where everybody essentially gets their comeuppance in such a Repairman Jack way, in this poetic justice, this vigilante poetic justice, it's really great. It's really, really great. And at the same time, then you know that the Dormentalist Church is still out there, that they still ultimately want to bring about Operation Opus Omega. And so you've still got this big threat despite everything that Jack has done. It's really fun. It's a great book. So anyway, that's really like all that I had to say with it. I mean, I could definitely say more, but I'll wrap this up. So, like I say, the book before this was Gateways. This is Crisscross, 2004, book number 8. And then the next one in the series is Infernal. So that is book number 9 in the series, and you can look for my short spoiler-free review video of that. Hopefully tomorrow, which will be on the Friday, because I'm struggling to keep up with this just because of my work schedule, but I'm slowly getting back on track. All right. Thanks so much for watching.